For the Life of the World is a production of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. For more information, visit faith.yale.edu.
How is it that the same man, St. Paul, who says, "Rejoice in the Lord always," is also the same man who writes, "Rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn"? I take it in Santa's world, those two things are contradictory. Either you're going to rejoice or you're going to mourn. Somehow, those two things aren't contradictory for Paul. It seems possible to somehow mourn while also rejoicing always. The life that Jesus invites us to enter into is sort of emotional life of presence, an emotional life of a life of emotional solidarity.
This is For the Life of the World, a podcast about seeking and living a life worthy of our humanity. I'm Evan Rosa with the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. Merry Christmas, friends. For this week, we're dropping a double dose of Christmas reflections, some Christmas joy, if you will, from the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. We'll be hearing from Matt Croasmun and Drew Collins, both of whom are associate research scholars and lead our Life Worth Living and Christ and Flourishing initiatives, respectively. Now, this episode is about Santa, God, and the obligation to rejoice. If you've celebrated Christmas in America any time in the past 200 years, that celebration probably includes just about as much of Santa Claus as it does Jesus. We won't attempt any historical treatment of Santa's origins in America, but dang, Santa really does go a long way from being the 3rd century Turkish bishop who reportedly, allegedly, punched the heretic Arius at the Council of Nicaea. What? To being the jolly fellow selling Coca-Cola, to a mystical being that millions of children grow up thinking is metaphysically real. And no, this is not an episode on whether or not to do the Santa Claus thing with your kids. But what comes along with the Christmas celebration is a deep story, a moral psychology of Santa, if you will, a morality of emotion that emerges from the mythology, and not only entertains us, but instructs us how to be happy, how and when to be joyful, and when to be sad, and sets a norm for the emotional life. So here's a conversation with my friend and colleague, Matt Croasmun. And don't forget to check out our other Christmas episode with Drew Collins on learning from the Magi, how to give, how to receive, and how to be human. Matt, thanks for joining me. You recently pointed out something that I found really interesting about Christmas movies. And of course, probably like many, many people, me and my family, and I know you and yours have been watching a lot of Christmas movies, but in particular, the way that these modern Christmas classics present Santa Claus and our relationship to Santa, the celebrant of Christmas, what they are required to do for Santa. And now I cannot stop seeing your points in every Christmas movie that I watch. So I'm hoping you can introduce it to the audience as well and sort of make this point about the way these movies present Santa Claus.
Yeah, once you see it, you can't stop seeing it. It hit me watching actually Mariah Carey's Christmas special from this year. I guess now I'm out as having watched this. Yes. My daughter wanted to watch this, and but it's
all I want for Christmas is you.
Oh, come on, yeah. I mean, so like the whole thing is like where it's going, where it's headed. But what's amazing is the conceit of the whole thing is set up at the beginning as being like Santa has this problem. And the problem is that 2020 has people bummed out and like holiday spirit is like running low. Right. And so like
it's an all-time low,
all-time low. And this isn't a problem because Santa's like sad for us. This is a problem because like Santa like needs us to be happy, right? Like somehow like Santa's magic like runs on our happiness, like on our holiday spirit. And if we don't have enough, like Santa is in deep trouble, right? And that made me think like, oh my goodness, like Elf like does like the same thing. Like Santa's sleigh like can't fly if we're like not cheery enough, right? And like the whole movie turns on like getting a bunch of grumpy New Yorkers to like sing a Christmas song so that like Santa's sleigh can like miraculously like get back up in the air.
It's amazing.
And it just like blew me away. I was like, oh my goodness, like this is the thing. And I feel like actually the Mariah Carey Christmas special like makes this especially just like transparent.
Yeah. So how does it do that?
Well, yeah. So there's this like great thing at the beginning where like Tiffany Haddish is like reading a sort of parody of "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," and that parody ends with Santa crying out to Billy Eichner, hilariously enough, his trusty secretary, "We need to raise everyone's spirits. They must be merry."
Wow.
And it's like, oh my goodness, right? Like it just like it's like hits you right in the face. Like Santa doesn't just want you to be happy, right? Like I might like you're my friend. I want, all things being equal, like I want you to be happy, right? It's was one thing like want someone to be happy. It's another thing to but like Santa like needs us to be happy. And that sort of neediness of Santa is sort of part of the shtick. It's part of like what we like owe him. And I don't know if that's because he's existentially vulnerable, right? Like, because like metaphysically, we're just like pretty sure like there isn't a Santa, but like we like can't give up the game. Like, I don't know exactly what it is, but like there's this like vulnerability where like Santa is like parasitic on our participation. But I think what Mariah Carey special gets right is that participation isn't just about like belief or something like that. It's specifically like emotional, right? Like Santa runs on our cheer. We like owe him that.
This also comes up in the Santa Claus, the Tim Allen Santa Claus, where it's almost as if those who have lost their faith in Santa Claus experience a kind of existential crisis over it. They lose a kind of meaning. And so what you're picking up on, what I see there is that there's a kind of sensibility that outside of what you'd think of as a sort of like the theological or like Christian spiritual approach to Christmas, the broader cultural experience of Christmas is one in which Santa represents not just entertainment value or a story, but like meaning itself, at least in the Christmas myth that is broadly present in American culture.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's right. And I think this emotional sort of component of Santa's, again, not just wish that we be happy, but need for us to be happy. I think this too is bigger than just Santa, right? It's our society as a whole. And I don't know exactly when it happened,
right?
But somewhere along the line, we went from Thomas Jefferson guaranteeing us the right to pursue happiness to a like responsibility that we produce happiness.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's not just Santa, right? Like Santa might be like holiday season, like bill collector, but like we're like incurring, like we like live under this indebtedness to society, right? To produce the happiness that we were at first to sort of promised, but now it has like become like our burden to perform.
And the thing that fascinates me about this, like as we talk about Santa, and we in my family, we just treat Santa like Mickey Mouse, fictional character,
he's a cartoon
fun
character.
story. He's a cartoon. But because, in plenty of other families, like he's ontologically a real being, and it kind of gets knit into the psychology of the year for a kid, but it's also knit into the sort of broader practice of Christmas. And when you start compare and contrast, right, the gospel of Christmas according to Saint Nick versus the gospel of Christmas according to Saint Paul, where you are encountering the reality of the incarnate Christ and the implication of Christmas on our spirituality, then it's like we're talking about a slightly different, more, I don't know, perhaps troubling situation.
Yeah, I mean the difference isn't that slight, right? Like Santa like needs you to be happy. I take it that God like wants you, like offers you joy. Those are very different sorts of postures. Now, it can seem for a moment like like there is some like close connection here, right? Because we do have the Apostle Paul, in fact, commanding us, rejoice always, right? In case you missed it. And I will say it again, rejoice, right? Rejoice in the Lord always.
Right.
And there can be this sort of worry that there's some sort of theological analog of like Santa's demand that you like produce the requisite holiday spirit.
Yeah.
These are two very different sorts of things. Like I said, on the one hand, like one of the key things is to figure out like Santa is in fact demanding something. I think that even when Paul commands joy, it has more the character of an invitation
Hmm.
than a sort of like, I don't know, demand that we produce something. I mean, one of the key thing, of course, is like what theologians have reflected on for millennia, right? Which is that God has no needs, right? Like God doesn't need anything from us. That's just not what it is to relate to God. God is self-sufficient. God has all that God needs. If anything, God may just want things for us, not from us. And I take it that this sort of genuine Christian joy, genuine Christmas joy, is going to be an offer sort of received from God rather than a need in God, right? That we're like trying to fill. But I bet there are other differences as well. But maybe it's just that the first one is the one to get plain right from the start, because otherwise it's way too easy for the ideology to just sort of flow in these really dangerous directions where all of a sudden we're not relating to God, we're relating to like Santa, like dressed
Yeah.
up as Jesus or Paul or someone, right? We're sort of like living under now a theologically sanctioned burden to produce the requisite Christmas joy. And if we're not able to produce the Christmas joy that we feel like Paul commands, somehow we're failing God or we're failing Jesus the way that we might fail Santa in a Christmas movie.
Right.
And I think we can feel that in Christian communities, and people right experience that. I mean, this is Charlie. I mean, back to another Christmas special,
Sure.
Charlie Brown's Christmas special, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what's wrong with me. Like, I think I'm supposed to be happy, right? Like we recognize this is a position we put one another in year after year around this time.
If it's true that this has been a harder year, and of course it has, it's been one of the most challenging years, at least collectively as a society, that we've had to go through in recent times. But suppose that's true, the response is not simply to bootstrap your way to happiness. It's not to flick a switch and turn on some Christmas cheer as if that is going to solve our happiness problem. That puts in stark relief the Christian alternative, which is to, as in your words, I mean, this is what you said, that Christian joy engages productively with sorrow. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, I think this is this is maybe another of the key differences, right? So Santa is threatened by sorrow, right, as depicted by these in these films, right? Right, 2020 has been such a downer. That means that like Santa's like his energy supply is running low. Again, God is not threatened by anything in the world, but even more, when it comes to genuine Christian joy, sorrow doesn't threaten joy. Now, that's not to say that God is unmoved by our sorrow. In fact, God enters into our sorrow, but God enters into our sorrow as and in that entering in and being with us as God with us, as we recognize and remember at Christmas, there's actually that's a mode of participation, a mode of sort of emotional solidarity, even on the part of God, that is itself actually a mode of joy. Because Christian joy is not threatened by sorrow. In certain ways, this side of eternity, this side of the kingdom fully come, Christian joy is quite often mixed with sorrow, deeply mixed with sorrow.
Hmm.
And the sort of the puzzle I've been thinking about ever since our many years long exploration of joy at the Center for Faith and Culture is how is it that the same man, St. Paul, who says, rejoice in the Lord always, is also the same man who writes, rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. Somehow, those two things aren't contradictory for Paul. I take it in Santa's world, those two things are contradictory. Either
Yeah,
you're going to
that has to be
rejoice,
right.
yeah, either you're going to rejoice or you're going to mourn. And but for Paul, it seems possible to somehow mourn while also rejoicing always. And so I take it that there may be, right, in the world of perfect love, it may be that we rejoice always and only. But
Hmm.
this side of the end of all things, the Christian sort of hope, or the Christian rule, as it were, not to get legalistic about it, right? Because again, I don't think it's a demand, but the sort of Christian rule of life should be rejoice always, but not only. Don't only rejoice. In fact, if you were to only rejoice in the world as it actually is, that would be actually quite wicked. There
Yeah.
are genuine causes for sorrow. I think there are genuine causes for anger. And the life that Jesus offers us, the life that Jesus invites us to enter into, is not some sort of emotionally aloof, sort of like, you know, fingers in the ears, la 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 la, I can't hear you, I'm so joyful, but rather a sort of emotional life of presence, an emotional life of a life of emotional solidarity.
Yeah.
Within the body of Christ, which I take it is what Paul's describing there in Romans 12:15, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. And I think also and from there, right, like out into the world as we love, as we sort of enter into God's love for the world that God loves so much. And so that gives Christian joy a very different character, because again, the rule is not rejoice always and only. The rule is rejoice always, but not only. And so the question is learning
Hmm.
Christian joy is about learning the way that joy mixes with sorrow, is in fact deepened through its sort of encounter with sorrow, is deepened through its encounter even maybe with some sort of righteous anger, if indeed when in fact our anger is righteous. Um, and that's just a very, very different sort of emotional life, a very different vision of emotional flourishing than we get from sort of the Santa myth.
Yeah, and and to hone in particular on the relational component of this, right? The shared life. I mean, there's a shared attempt at collectively running Santa's sleigh, right? That when we sing together, then yes, the sleigh runs again. But it's fascinating that it's not the alternative, right? That when we mourn together, right? Because in fact, um, that might be where the difference gets made. It's when we are communicating with one another in solidarity at our lowest points. That's when we see a real difference in what it means to flourish.
I think that's right, and I think theologically the the difference there is, we could say, one of eschatologies. Santa has an over-realized eschatology.
Okay,
um,
say more about that. What do you mean by that?
right. So Christian joy, in that same chapter in Romans, Paul invites us to rejoice in hope and be patient in suffering, persevere in prayer. And it's the fact that all Christian joy, I take it, is rejoicing in hope. Now you can rejoice in hope in the presence of some partial fulfillment of what you hope for, right? So I'm not saying all of our joy is, that there are no genuine causes for joy in the world as we experience it. Of course there are, right? But there's a fundamental
Mm-hmm.
character of Christian joy that is joy in hope in this life, right? Because we have this eschatological orientation that that has the kingdom of God yes, breaking um, here and there in places, always with incompletion and always with less than our full, at least I'll speak for myself, less than our full sort of devotion to it. We're always weak in our own sort of commitment to it. And yet with hope that someday the kingdom will be established in its fullness. Again, if there's ever a moment for sort of where Christian joy looks as fully realized as it is in sort of the Santa myth, it would be in the world of perfect love. It would be in God having fully sort of remade the world as God's home. In that world, then maybe the rule is, or the way of life is, that we rejoice always and only. But it's because we have this eschatological character. We rejoice in hope, that our joy always, I take it, has this different sort of orientation towards the world. Our joy has to have a truthful orientation to the world as it actually is. And that world is not yet as it should be, not fully, in places here and there, and sometimes deeply and profoundly in ways that bring just unfiltered, uncomplicated occasions for joy, right? Because God created the world, and its goodness will just appear to us in moments. And there are those sorts of moments of joy, but there are many moments in this life where that joy is, as Alexander Schmemann, the Orthodox theologian, famously said, and we have repeated many times around the center, Christian joy appears to us as a bright sorrow. So as Christians, when we rejoice in hope. And it strikes me that that's appropriate, especially to this season of Advent that we've been in. Historically, the season of Advent, yes, is for celebrating and remembering Christ's advent, his coming to, entering into this world. But it also historically has always been a time of looking forward in hope to Christ's second coming, which probably doesn't get as much play these days. Maybe we've heard sort of unhelpfully pie in the sky preaching about the second coming, or we've only ever heard it connected with fire and brimstone, or whatever it is. Maybe there are probably good reasons we don't hear all these huge eschatological sermons. But there's something appropriately Advent, appropriately Christmas in our Christian worship. We should be, I take it, oriented toward that sense of hope, because it wasn't just Mary and Joseph and the shepherds and the wise men and all the others who used to live in hope. We too live in hope, and so I think this Advent season is an opportunity for us to get back in touch with that hope and remind ourselves that is our orientation toward this world. We should rejoice. Our hearts should be glad when we think about the nearness of God in Jesus Christ and God's continued nearness to us in the Spirit of the living Christ among us. But we should also be reminded in this season of that hoped for reality in which God's nearness, God's presence to us is brought to its full consummation at the capital E end of all things.
Yeah, that's the kind of real hope that we're talking about when we think about what Christmas represents. It's so much less about the trappings of decorations and the accessories to American consumer Christmas. It's really about the grand work of God.
It's the big story of God relating to all that is not God. This is the Christian story. And in this season especially, we're reminded that the whole thing has this forward trajectory, right? It's, this forward momentum to it, and that sort of that trajectory, that orientation, that points from creation to consummation. That the arrow there is an arrow of hope, a hope that God, who created, will be good to bring to completion the good thing that God began in the creation of the world.
Matt, thanks for joining me. This is just a refreshing take on Christmas and joy, as opposed to a kind of thin, emaciated happiness. Merry Christmas to you and your family, and thanks for these amazing, wonderful thoughts.
Thanks, Evan. Merry Christmas to you.
For the Life of the World is a production of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture at Yale Divinity School. This episode featured New Testament scholar Matt Croasmun. I'm Evan Rosa, and I edited and produced the show. For more information, visit us online at faith.yale.edu. We produce a new episode every Saturday, and you can subscribe through any podcast app. We're grateful that you're listening to this podcast. We're passionate about making this work consistently accessible to people who are genuinely concerned about the viability of faith in a world racked with division, contested views about what it means to be human, and what it means to live life well. If you're in a position to support our show financially and are looking for some year-end opportunities, please consider partnering with us. We rely on the generosity of individuals like you to make our work possible. And if you're not, please continue listening and engaging the content. Let us know what you're interested in. We're grateful that you're listening. But if you can give, if you're truly passionate about supporting podcasting that's all about pursuing, really living lives that are worthy of our humanity, then consider a gift to the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. Visit faith.yale.edu/give. or find the link in the show notes to make a year-end contribution. It's our joy to bring these shows to you, and we'd invite you to bring that same joy in supporting this work. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll be back with more next week.